Well guys, I'm not just a YouTuber, I'm someone that loves to watch YouTube, and I kept seeing this video get requested against my videos. It was getting recommended like crazy, and at first I never really looked at it, and then I was like, wait a minute. Why I'm all in on Tesla stock? And I go on to proceed to watch this entire video, which basically this gentleman goes into all his bullish points on Tesla, and he goes on to say he's got 80% plus of his money in Tesla stock. And so I'm gonna go ahead and talk about this, if this is a smart move, because I know I've seen it in the comment section many times that people are like all in Tesla stock or like have the most of their money in this. And I'm like, this is a subject we got to talk about, especially with a video like this. Like, it was unbelievable. By the way, if you haven't seen the video yet, essentially goes into all his bullish points. Now, a lot of them are very similar bullish points that I make on my channel, as well as Galileo does over there at Hyperchange, but there are a few that he probably makes that I don't talk about enough. So it was a well done video in my opinion. He goes on in the video and he says 80% plus of his money is in Tesla stock. Now, you know how much I believe in Tesla stock, okay? I have videos here on YouTube on why I believe Tesla stock is going to be $3,000 plus a share in the next 10 years. So needless to say, I'm one of the biggest bulls on Tesla. I'm definitely a huge believer. So I'm definitely not going to talk down Tesla in the respect of like being bullish and believing in the company and things like that. As you guys know, it's not like I just believe in it. I also put my money where my mouth is, okay? If you look at the public account, which everybody can see in my private stock group, I have 150 shares in that particular account. We're up like almost $20,000 on those shares. In one of my bigger private accounts, I have 113 shares in that particular account. We're up over $16,000 in that one. I also own it in my retirement account and one other smaller account, and I believe my wife owns it in her retirement account, and some shares in one of her regular accounts. So needless to say, we probably own Tesla shares in like 5 or 6 different accounts. So we have a lot of Tesla shares, let's put it that way. And as you guys know, I'm a proud owner of a Model 3 Performance Edition, which is definitely my favorite car I've ever owned and probably my favorite car I've ever driven. So with all that being said, I'm extremely bullish on Tesla, and I love Tesla's products. I believe a lot in the company, obviously, and so I thought this would be appropriate. Let's talk about this, okay? So this gentleman says, essentially, he's got 80%, I believe it's 80% plus of his wealth in Tesla stock, okay? So which is pretty much like almost all in. I think he has a couple smaller positions, but he's pretty much almost all in Tesla stock. Now, I've, in the past, before I got into YouTube, there were many times when I did these sorts of things where I went super heavy into stocks I believed in, okay? And I gotta say, most of the time it worked. Going super heavy in a stock you really believe in, put in 60%, 70%, 80% plus of your wealth essentially into one stock. A lot of times it did work, but I gotta say, eventually you can make a mistake, okay? And that's part what we'll get into in this video, but we've got to talk about risk reward in relation to Tesla stock, because whenever you're making any investment, doesn't matter if you're putting 10% of your wealth into it, 5% of your wealth, or 80% or a super high number, you got to think about it in terms of risk reward. What is my potential risk going into this stock or this investment in general, and what is my potential reward? So when we think about Tesla, okay, what's the worst case scenario that you can basically, you buy into Tesla stock here today, which Tesla stock, I don't know, is maybe $360, $350, something like that. You buy into Tesla stock, obviously the worst case scenario is somehow the company becomes insolvent over time, somehow the company loses all their tech advantages they have, their brand leadership when it comes to electric vehicles, autopilot, they can't make a successful like energy business, and no one loans them money, and so it's an extremely unrealistic scenario. But the worst case scenario for you, if you were buying Tesla shares, is the stock goes to $0, right? And you end up losing 100% of your wealth that you would put into the stock, whether you put 5%, 10%, or like this gentleman, 80%, okay? That's absolutely worst case scenario. Very low probability. It's a very low probability that Tesla could lose all their leadership positions on everything, and suddenly overnight, like no one wants to buy a Tesla, and suddenly like Ford and GM and everybody else is like selling like a ton of electric cars, or like suddenly like no one is interested in electric cars, and all of a sudden everybody's like just drives ICE vehicles forever. It's possible, okay? Everything in this world is possible, but it is extremely unlikely that type of scenario would play out like that, okay? I think, in my personal opinion, the kind of the worst case scenario for Tesla, as far as a realistic worst case scenario, okay? When we're talking about a realistic worst case scenario, in my opinion, is the stock is is like forever stuck in like a $200 to like $400 range, okay? In my opinion, that's the realistic worst case scenario for Tesla. And this would be assuming they don't really ever have like an autonomous taxi network. This is assuming they're always like kind of like more of a niche player, like they sell, let's say 500,000 to 1 million electric cars a year or something like that. And let's say their solar business never becomes a massive business, and the battery business doesn't become a massive business, and they're just kind of forever stuck in a place where they maybe sell like 500,000 to maybe like 1 million EVs per year, okay? And that's as big as they ever get. They could likely still make good profits off that, but they would be a niche player, okay? And so, you know, let's just say forever and ever they're kind of stuck as a $200, $400 stock. In my opinion, if you're looking at a realistic worst case scenario, I think that's kind of realistic worst case scenario for Tesla. They're always like a niche EV player. They never achieve any of their big dreams in terms of like autonomous taxi networks and things like that, okay? The $0, it is so unbelievably unrealistic. I can't even explain it to you. It's ridiculously unrealistic. This is realistic worst case scenario, okay? So now we have kind of the risk figured out. So there's obviously definitely risk going in, right? The stock could forever be stuck in a $200 to $400 range. Tesla's always like somewhat of a niche player in the electric vehicle market, okay? And maybe they just find a way where they can make, you know, a few $1 billion in profit a year, maybe $3 billion of profit a year, $5 billion of profit a year, or something like that. Then it's going to be stuck as a $200 to $400 stock if that's all they achieve, okay? Now, reward potential. In theory, obviously, it is unlimited, okay? Unlimited, whenever you buy into a stock, the reward potential is unlimited. The stock could go to $1,000 a share, it could go to $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. Who knows where the stock could go? But obviously, it's also unrealistic that it would just go up to the moon forever, okay? It's very unrealistic that it would be $10,000 a share unless it did some type of reverse split or something like that, okay? So in theory, you know, if you're thinking like this stock could be $10,000 a share, very unrealistic. But as with the $0 case, you know, technically in theory, all things are possible, okay? Now let's talk about a realistic, you know, reward scenario that, you know, great things happen for Tesla, okay? A realistic scenario for this stock is this is a $1,000 to let's say $3,000 stock in the future, okay? Somewhere in there. In my opinion, this is a realistic best case scenario for Tesla. This is a company getting to scale where they're selling, you know, 5 million plus EVs every single year, okay? Every single year, year in and year out. They're selling 5 million plus. They're like the dominant player in all of the developed world when it comes to selling electric vehicles, okay? If they do that, then this should be a company that easily makes somewhere around 20 billion to 40 billion in profit per year. If they're selling 5 million plus electric vehicles year in and year out, and as battery costs continue to decline, and as Tesla makes these cars better and better, faster and faster, and figures out how to get even more costs out of it, which Tesla seems very committed with. If they're doing that and they're doing 5 million plus EVs per year, they're going to likely make, you know, a profits of essentially 20 billion to 40 billion per year. And then you can justify anywhere between a 250 billion to a 500 billion dollar valuation very, very easily if they're making those type of profits, which in my opinion is going to be definitely very possible if you're looking at a 5 to 10 year horizon, okay? Obviously, if you add on something like the autonomous taxi network, that's a huge opportunity there, okay? Autonomous taxi network, this is essentially, think about Uber, Lyft, you know, all these type of rideshare services, but think about them with no driver actually in the car, and the car just comes pick you up, and then you get in the car, it goes and drops you off to your destination, everything's done on an app. So it's essentially like an Uber or Lyft service, just with no physical driver in there, okay? Tesla's gonna have a phenomenal opportunity, in my opinion, because of all the things they are doing with autopilot, okay? All the experience, all the real world autopilot miles these cars are getting, this is a huge opportunity for Tesla, and this is one of the reasons why they have a decent probability of being the number one or the number two player in autonomous taxi network if you're looking at a long-term horizon, in my opinion. There are not a lot of companies that are more well-positioned, in my personal opinion, than Tesla, and this is why ultimately, long-term, I think it's going to end up being between Tesla and Uber on who's going to be number one in this market and who's going to be number two. Uber's obviously got the brand name in terms of everybody's used to. If you get a ride somewhere, you go in an Uber car, and that's what everybody's used to, and so they kind of like built that brand name up and things like that, and they're partnering with a ton of companies, so they'll be right there in the mix, and then you got Tesla right there, and I think these are going to end up being the number two two players that end up being in that market, and I think everything else is going to end up being kind of third, okay? So services like Waymo, I don't think they got the real world miles out there in my opinion, and also I think they're going to have a lot of trouble on the marketing side when it comes to trying to market and get this product out there and whatnot. And then you see things like Cruise Automation. I'm not sure Cruise Automation is going to fulfill what it could potentially fulfill, because it is going to be under GM, and just the way GM's run, I'm not fully sure that Cruise Automation is going to be able to do what they set out to do. We'll have to see how that works out over time. So in my personal opinion, the two biggest players in this market long term will end up being Tesla and Uber. So if you're looking at like a reward potential here, there's definitely huge reward potential. There's no doubt about that. And then you could talk about the solar business, then you could talk about the battery business, and then you could talk about future products and services that Tesla hasn't even talked about yet, hasn't even begun selling, or things like that, okay? There's a ton of opportunity here for Tesla. So there's definitely massive reward potential if things work out, okay? And there's definitely some risks that you tie up your money in this stock for the next 5-10 years, and they're always, be like a niche player, and they can never get above like a 1 million number for EV sold or something like that, and maybe they don't convert on autonomous taxi networks, and maybe that's way harder than it seems. So there's definitely risk in. Main risk in my opinion is you tie up money and it doesn't do anything for you over the next 5-10 years. The reward potential is you 3x, 4x, 5x, 6x, maybe even 7x or 8x your money over the next 10 years. And Tesla ends up growing into one of the next big huge tech giants, like a Microsoft, like an Apple, like a Facebook, and all these other companies, Amazon, that are these companies that have $500+ billion market caps, and some of them even around $1 trillion and up, okay? But here's my main issue, okay? Here's my main issue with putting 80% of your wealth in a stock. Let's say anything above 50% of your wealth in a stock, okay? And what I gotta say is, over time, YouTube has made me a much better investor, a much more disciplined investor. Because it has made me, since I got this, I don't know, whatever you wanna call it, all the subscriber numbers and whatnot, I realize like I'm influential, people can watch me, and they kind of look at me as like a role model, and what's he doing in the market, and if I all of a sudden went all in a stock or something like that, I think a lot of people would be like, oh, it's okay for me to go all in a stock. And the main issue I have with going all in on any stock, or close to all in on any stock, is essentially you eventually will get bitten. Maybe it's not by Tesla. Maybe Tesla goes great over the next several years and you make a ton of money on that, and that'd be awesome, and all of us Tesla shareholders are going to be very happy if that happens, okay? But what ends up happening when you go to the well once, you don't just go once, you go a second time, a third time, a fourth time, a fifth time, and it doesn't stop. And once you find something that continues to work, you keep going back to it. You keep going back to it, okay? And so after Tesla stock, and we've all made our money in Tesla stock, like hopefully it happens and it's all great and whatnot, we go find the next one. And then after that next stock, we go find the next one. And eventually you get to the one that absolutely decimates you. You go super heavy in on it, and whatever reasons happen, that stock didn't work out. And that stock ends up being the one that decimated you. And it might not be Tesla. It could be Tesla. Who knows? Maybe everything goes bad and because it becomes a bankrupt company or insolvent or something like that. Not the most realistic scenario, but maybe it's Tesla. Maybe it's not Tesla. Maybe Tesla goes great. But you know what? It could be the next one and next one, because generally, once you start doing this, you don't stop doing this. Like, this is human behavior. And when we get rewarded for something, we want to go find the next thing. And if we put, let's say, 100% of our wealth, 50% of our wealth, 80% of our wealth in a stock, it goes good. Next thing we're going to be looking at is, what's the next company that we're going to be able to do that same thing in? And we go try to find that one. And maybe that one works out, or maybe that's the one that takes us down. But eventually you get into one that will take you down, because I can promise you, if you've been in the stock market long enough, you've picked a bad stock, or you've picked, several bad stocks. It happens. And if that one stock that you picked as the bad stock happened to be the stock you went all in on or super heavy in on, guess what just happened to your wealth? You just got absolutely decimated. You just lost 50% of your wealth, 60% of your wealth, 70% of your wealth in a snap of fingers. And believe me, it happens a lot quicker than one might think. So I actually don't agree with this situation of going all in on a stock. I mean, obviously everybody can do whatever the heck they want to do. And if they want to put out 100% of their money and go on margin, that's their own decision. decision. I would never do that, and I would never suggest anybody do that. But if people want to do that, you know, they can go ahead, but I would never suggest this, not because it might not work out in Tesla, just because it'll end up biting you in the end. You will end up getting into a stock, whether it's a year from now, a few years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. I can promise you, you'll end up getting in a stock that you went way too heavy on, and it comes back to bite you, and that's just the way it works. That's the stock market for you, and that's business for you in the end. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.